Hi, I'm Charlie. Welcome to episode 6 of 7 of my series on Nestor Makhno, entitled Fall of the Free Territory, the year 1920. Alright, it's the year 1920, the year that traditionally follows 1919. And it was a doozy for Nestor Ivanovich Makhno in the free territory of Makhnovia. You see, where we last left off, Trotsky and Makhno were back to fighting each other after teaming up briefly in an enemy mine type situation to destroy Anton Denikin's White Army. But now you're back to your old, reliable enemies who you can hate without reservation, but still use when it suits you. Well, in 1920, early 1920, in April, a guy named Pyotr Wrangel of the White Army shows up. And confusingly, he is nicknamed the Black Baron for his sartorial lack of color. Sartorial achromaticism, I guess you could say. It's not at all confusing having someone named the Black Baron lead the White Army when they actually have to fight the Black Army. Gah! Just reading about it was very frustrating, but Wrangel is one of those czarist generals who is very, very good at his job. And it becomes very clear as he moves up through Ukraine that he is currently stronger than either Trotsky's Red Army or Makhno's Black Army. And so, we're going to do this same old dance again with Trotsky. Makhno must be thinking, looks like we have to make a deal with the devil again. It's a miracle we survived the last one. But Makhno, being a very shrewd peasant type, makes sure to make Trotsky pay through the nose to get his help. You know, if you want me to help you save your ass, pay up. And the final price that Makhno insists is that all anarchist prisoners be released from Bolshevik custody. Because while this is all going on in Ukraine, the Bolsheviks are brutally purging every non-Bolshevik they can get their hands on with the Cheka, and anarchists, by their definition, are non-Bolshevik. So are Social Democrats, so are peasants, so are any number of political persuasions. There's actually a great moment where Makhno goes to Moscow to make sure they follow up on their end of the deal to release all the anarchist prisoners. And he comes across his old friend Arshinov, who they'd had a falling out. And according to some sources, Arshinov is sitting in jail, and Nestor Makhno shows up like, "Congratulations, I've negotiated for your freedom." And it tells you how bad they're falling out, most of them, because Arshinov just sort of looks at his cell. We've talked about how bad Russian prisons are. And looks at Makhno, looks back at his cell again. "Well, I guess you are slightly better than prison," and leaves with his friend Makhno. Trotsky's plan in all this was likely to have the Black Army take the majority of the hits from Wrangel. So, we shouldn't be surprised that Trotsky's very cynical strategy in allying with the Makhnovists, remember, he's allying with people whose very right to exist he disputes categorically, is to have the Makhnovites to take up the majority of Wrangel's military blows. Hopefully they'll weaken each other, and then the Red Army can heroically sweep in and destroy both of them. It's almost certainly what Makhno was thinking too. And unfortunately, it goes about as Trotsky expected. Wrangel deals the Makhnovites, the Black Army, some very heavy blows. Defeat after defeat. Remember? Old Tsarist officer, a lot of experience from the First World War and before that. Probably one of the best generals in the Russian Civil War. Very good at his job. And eventually, he pushes through the Black Army and thinks that they're no longer a factor in any realistic appraisal of the power structures and armies of Ukraine. The Red Army's also on the run. Even with their nominal non-aggression treaty and alliance, Trotsky can't stop Wrangel either. Wrangel did make one error, though, an error that would be very costly. The error was the same error that Catherine the Great and her generals made with Pugachev 100+ years ago. The mistake is counting the scrappy populist underdog out of the fight before the fight's actually over. Wrangel was rather dismissive of the Black Army's chances to even exist, let alone pose a threat. And Wrangel gathers himself up and moves north into striking distance of Moscow. And the thing to understand about armies, except for, of course, some notable exceptions like the Mongols, is that they are limited by their supply chain. The supply chain is, to put it very briefly, all the extra ammo you need, all the food, all the extra animals. Remember, this is a war fought largely, at least in the Ukraine, from horseback or on the backs of carts. I mean, there was infantry, obviously, but one of the most notorious units of this time, the unit that Makhno is said to have invented, is called the Tachanka, which is an old hay cart drawn by a pair of horses, 2 or 4. You just sort of stapled a heavy machine gun to, and you would ride up and spray bullets everywhere. Now, that supply chain of Wrangel's is like a string on a yo-yo. The yo-yo can only go so far as the string it's on. Can't go further, it stops being a yo-yo and starts being a projectile, unconnected to everything. And Wrangel's mistake, part 2, subsection 1, is thinking that his supply line, supply base, is out of reach and out of range of Nestor Ivanovich Makhno. Surprise, bitch! Makhno probably said in Ukrainian, and probably not quite in that intonation. But as Wrangel is about to deal the death blow to the Bolsheviks, there is almost no certainty that the Bolsheviks could have held Moscow against a tactician and army that Wrangel was heading. It was curtains, lacy, gently wafting curtains for the Bolsheviks. But Makhno descends in a daring raid and wrecks Wrangel's supply base. That string on the yo-yo just snapped Wrangel back from being a threat to Moscow. It throws him into utter disarray. And from then forwards, the tide shifts toward the Red and Black Army, and Wrangel has to fight a fighting retreat all through Ukraine, burning and pillaging as you go, because that is literally the entire story of the Russian Civil War. And he escapes. Wrangel, the Black Baron, very snappy guy, escapes, but 50,000 of his men don't in the Crimean Peninsula. And they are all, of course, brutally slaughtered in retaliation. And let's play Trotsky Bingo. What do you think? Oh, I have immediately betray your ally. Yep, there are a lot of those on the bingo board of Trotsky. And that's exactly what he does, kids. He does this in a very red wedding type of way, where a lot of the senior Makhnovist commanders are due to have a meeting with the Bolshevik senior commanders and sort of work out, how do we coexist, or what do we do now that we've beaten back the White Army? And the anarchists are immediately shot when they arrive. Makhno gets word of this betrayal and almost certainly wasn't surprised, but was promptly horrified. And he manages to rally everything he can, and what follows is a really ugly, dirty knife fight, figuratively speaking, between Trotsky and Makhno. Makhno, remember, took way heavier hits from Wrangel than the Red Army did. There are less of them. And despite a lot of the Red Army troops wanting to defect to the Black Army or the Green Army. The fact is that the Red Army has a lot more going for it at this late stage in the Russian Civil War than the Makhnovists, who've been fighting longer, have. The will to fight is not as strong because they've been fighting for a much longer time. And the Bolsheviks do something that they will typically do. You could summarize Bolshevik policy in general as making nice-sounding promises, and then the second you have what you want, immediately reneging, which is they started the campaign of, to this average Ukrainian peasant, listen, the White Army's done. Welcome to the shining new future. You will, of course, be left alone in dignity and all this sort of good human rights stuff. The only catch is if you give up your guns, we'll know you're sincere. And welcome to the glorious future. Well, half of that's true, generously, but enough Ukrainian peasants gave up their arms to the Bolsheviks as they were pushed further and further into Ukraine, that it made guerrilla war more difficult than it had been against, say, the Austro-Hungarians or the Mennonites or the White Army. It's hard to do guerrilla warfare without weaponry. And Makhno fights the good fight, but is grievously injured, and he escapes with some of his top staff into Romania, grievously wounded. Makhno would never return to Ukraine. Fedor Schuss and some of Makhno's other top staff will survive until 1921, fighting the Bolsheviks as hard as they can and die in action. But it's pretty much over for the Makhnovists. And like the Tsarists, who they purported to replace and improve upon, but really simply replaced, the Bolsheviks set about trying to erase the memory of Nestor Makhno in the Ukraine and of the Free Territories. The afterlife of Nestor Makhno would begin in 1921, even though he was still alive.